If you're disabled, the performed view of parenthood won't work for you. And so you kind
Right.
of start from scratch. But I think everyone could start from scratch. Like, who am I? Who is my family? What are our needs? What's our financial situation? What is my body like? What are my emotions like? Do I sleep well? Changing the standards based on our own individual experiences, I think, offers a lot of freedom to all parents.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret, and today I am talking to Jessica Slice. Jessica is a disabled author, speaker, and essayist. Her new book, Unfit Parent, A Disabled Mother Challenges an Inaccessible World, was shortlisted for the J. Anthony Lucas Prize. She is the co-author of Dateable, Swiping Right, Hooking Up, and Settling Down, and This Is How We Play. She has been published in Modern Love, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, among many others. She lives in Toronto with her family. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
First of all, I want to say to our listeners, this is a book about disabled parenting, but there is so much in this book. If you're listening and thinking, well, I can turn this off. I'm not a disabled parent, nor do I know a disabled parent. First of all, I would suggest you're probably wrong about that. And second of all, there are so many lessons in this book for everyone listening right now. So stay tuned, as they say. Let's talk, Jessica, first about this title, which really jumps out at you. Unfit Parent. What made you choose that title? It's obviously very evocative.
Yeah, I mean, I chose it because in 22 states in the US, it is legal to remove a child because the parent is disabled. The
That
CPS,
is a shocking thing I learned in this book. Say it one more
yes,
time for people. In 22 states.
grounds for child removal for Child Protective Services in 22 states is parental disability. And in the reports about those parents, which I've read, they're called unfit parents. This person is unfit to parent. It is legally dictated that disabled people are unfit to parent. And then also, disabled people in 31 states are allowed to be sterilized against our will and prevented from reproducing because we're considered unfit. And so I wanted to kind of reference this egregious discrimination. But what I also wanted to kind of reference with that is I have a suspicion that every single parent, disabled and not, secretly worries that they are unfit, that
Hmm.
it is so impossible to parent to the standards that we are held to by our perfectionistic and individualistic society that we all sort of have this constant fear that we're unfit. And so I also wanted to reference that. I thought readers, disabled and non disabled, would see that title and be like, ooh, yeah, that's a thing I secretly worry about.
I'm going to quote you to yourself. You say, if you are a parent, disabled or not, and you are exhausted and feel like you are drowning in inhumane policies and culture, I hope this book offers hope. My first message is this: you aren't wrong. You are doing something impossible. But the good news is that marginalized people are often the first to notice when something is broken, and as such, are the first to establish reparative solutions. And that's why I say sometimes it feels kind of pat to say, oh, there's something in this book for everyone. This really is a book about parenting first and the
Yeah.
hurdles of parenting. And you come at it from this lens of being a disabled parent. But some of these problems are about all of us, really.
Exactly. And what I did, I actually didn't include the parts about sterilization or child protective services, as you saw, until the very end,
Right.
because I wanted to build up this shared experience between disabled and non disabled people, showing that parenting is impossible for everyone, including
Hmm.
disabled people, but that actually disability cultures offer solutions. And so that there would be this sort of unified sense that we all deserve better. And so then by the time you get to the end of the book showing child protective services and forced sterilization, I thought it would increase the outrage and commitment to change because disabled parents are not a wholly separate group that live lives totally different from every other parent.
Absolutely. And I think that we found that so much on the podcast. Amy and I are both white 4-year college graduates from
Mhm.
the Northeast of the United States. And pretty quickly we realized, okay, our experience as parents, I mean, the premise of our podcast is that we parent from completely opposite points of view. Amy's kind of
Mhm.
structured and I'm very loosely structured. She's
Mhm.
like follow the formula and I'm kind of go with the flow or go with
Mhm.
whatever's happening in the day. But that there are so many experiences of motherhood outside of our own. And that in the fresh takes, it's been really interesting to talk to people. And there's never a person we talk to that we think, well, this experience of motherhood is so other that we have nothing to learn from it. It's like
Right.
the nice
Right.
thing about having conversations through a motherhood lens is that
Mhm.
there is a ton of commonality in the center. And then as we go past our common places, there's a lot to learn from each other, I think.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No parenting experience is irrelevant to our individual experience.
And our
Mhm.
common experience as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you talk in the book about kind of wondering where to start your story. So start your story for us wherever you want to in terms of how you came to write this book.
It's interesting. I had wanted to write a memoir of my experience becoming disabled because I underwent a pretty dramatic experience in like my physical experience, but also my perspective on the world and what I wanted from life, what makes a good life, my connection to suffering.
And talk about that experience, if you will, so that we
Yeah,
know
of
where
course.
we are in the story.
So I am 42 now. And when I was 28, I had this bizarre life in my 20s. I was waiting to hear from a grad school and I decided to become a real estate agent in order to pay for grad school. And then I ended up falling in love with real estate and then became like kind of too successful in my 20s with real estate. Started a company, made a lot of money, and just had this like really on paper perfect life. I was
Mhm.
married to my college sweetheart. We were out with friends most nights of the week. We went on these lavish vacations. And I was also always deeply dissatisfied. I felt like I was just one bit of effort away from actually being happy. I kept thinking,
Mhm.
like, well, as soon as I get this, or as soon as I do this, or if I was only doing this, I would finally be happy. And this like sense of dissatisfaction was really corrosive in me. It made me sort of manically pursue better in everything. And then one day when I was 28, I was on a hike on a Greek island in Santorini, and the hike got extended because of a pack of wild dogs, and the extending the hike caused heat exhaustion. And for me, that heat exhaustion woke up a neurological condition that
Mm.
had been kind of lying in wait the whole time. And so the day before the hike, I was a runner, a business owner, a traveler. And then the day after the hike, I couldn't get out of bed. So when I tried to walk down the hallway to get breakfast, I couldn't even walk. I was so lightheaded and weak and so nauseated. And then that began the process of 2 years of trying to find a diagnosis. And as I'm sure you've talked about and know, women have such a hard time getting diagnoses. And then years coming to terms with the diagnosis. And then finally, the sort of acceptance of my new, much, much more limited life. And then embracing the identity of disabled.
Yeah,
But I,
it's
yeah.
a specific and interesting journey, I think, that many people who I know have the experience of one life and then one day and then a
Mm,
completely different life, a car accident,
yes.
let's say a
Yes.
disabling car accident. We both, Amy and I, have parents have had kids who have had kind of long and mysterious diagnoses
Mm,
themselves and
mm-hmm,
taking that journey and trying to figure out and then kind of wait, what does it mean? Is this
mm-hmm,
disability or is this just something that's about to get fixed? And I
mm-hmm.
found the way you described that it's not the like light bulb. It's kind of this weird tunnely morass that you have to go through to
Yes.
say, and then on the other side is some sort of acceptance of this disabled label that maybe you don't feel that comfortable with, that it feels like the goal is to avoid that label at all costs at first.
Definitely. Yes. And, it's funny, the label kind of hovered around me for years before I realized it actually applied. I had a disabled placard in my car. I received SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. When I ended up going to grad school, I registered with Disability Student Services. And for some reason, at none of those points did I think I'm disabled.
Right.
I thought that's
Right.
just the name that they
Right.
say.
I'm just stopping by here. Don't get attached to me. I don't really belong here. This isn't really me.
Yeah, and I include that in the book because it's obviously not parenting related. My book's approach is really embracing my identity as
Yep.
disabled and really looking at the strengths of it, which I do at this point strongly believe in and experience. But I didn't want readers to think that I came by that easily. It was a hard one acceptance of my lived reality. There were many years of not accepting it and of grieving it and denying it. And I wanted to include a taste of that in the book I ended up writing because I think it's important to understand the perspective the book gives.
And then you start a journey of this new identity. And you
Mm-hmm.
say, when I talk to people who became disabled as a child or were born with disabilities, I am struck by the sense of entitlement I retain as somebody with an acquired disability. I am surprised when the world isn't designed for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so you've seen the world from both sides now, as Joni Mitchell says, right? Like you,
Yeah.
and I think it offers a very
Yeah.
specific perspective that you were a runner and a let's
Mm-hmm.
jump on the plane and go. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to consider anything about my existence other than kind of the day to day. And then
Mm-hmm.
experiencing this other side of coming at a world that is really not designed for the way that you now live.
Right. And my body changed, but also when I became disabled, I stopped working. I couldn't
Mm.
work and I went through a divorce and it took a few years to get approved for disability insurance. I went through all this process of getting denied. So I went through years with no income. So I from being flush with cash, partnered, able-bodied, and then suddenly I'm trying to figure out my finances. Like that was very precarious. Everything changed and I think I really did retain this sense of outrage because I had lived the other way. And I thought, like, I don't deserve this. And the fact is, no one deserves it. But
Right.
maybe if I had had that outrage like pummeled out of me over decades, I wouldn't
Right.
have retained it the way I have. But I'm still shocked when I'm discriminated against. I think that's just part of my perspective.
Yeah, it's like you are the frog who got thrown in the boiling water, and you're like, "Whoa, guys, this is nuts over here. What's
That's a great
happening?
analogy. Yeah. I'm like, guys, we're boiling. Like,
This is
this is
not
not
okay.
okay.
What's
Yeah.
happening?"
Yeah.
So let's talk about your journey to motherhood, how you became a mom.
Great. So when I was in my early 30s, I had a boyfriend, David, and we bought a two-bedroom house in Oakland, California, where I was living. And I can be a real, like, moralistically rigid person. And I got it in my head that it was immoral of us to have a second bedroom and not have someone stay in it
Okay.
because housing in Oakland is so expensive.
So expensive.
And we had time and we had the space and I felt like I had the emotional capacity. And so I convinced David that we should be foster parents. We were not engaged. We were serious. Obviously, we bought a house, but it was not our family planning. It was purely based on this sense of if we have room, if we have time, we should be foster parents. And so we went through the foster system and I go into detail in the book, but it was not easy to get licensed as a disabled person. And then we were licensed up through age 12.
Mhm.
And we actually met with someone about having a 16-year-old refugee stay with us. We were really thinking that there would be an older kid in our house. And we had a few baby supplies, but it's almost impossible to outfit a house for every child age 0 through 12. Like
Yeah.
you can't.
Complicated.
And so we
You're like, "Are we
basically
doing
had,
board books or video
yeah,
games? I don't know what's happening over here."
yeah. So we kind of had supplies for no one.
Right.
And then on a Tuesday night, we had a child stay with us for a little bit, and that's their story, and I'll keep it their story. So the second call we got was on a Tuesday night at 9 p.m., and they said there's a baby in the NICU, and she needs a place to stay for just a couple weeks, maybe a month. Are you all free? And we were like, yeah, okay. We weren't expecting a newborn, but I really like babies. And so David went to work the next day because this was supposed to be so temporary.
Right.
And I went to the hospital, and that's where I met our daughter, who I call Kay in the book and
Yeah.
call Kay publicly. And I met her, and she was just absolutely magical. And she was 8 days old, and we brought her home. And within a month or two, it was clear that she was going to need a long term home. So we agreed to transition our license from foster to adopt. We also had to get a bunch of baby supplies. I
Right.
talk in the book about this adjustment to realizing we suddenly have a newborn.
Oddly, my best friend, who's been on the podcast because she's also an author, Nora Lally, she
Oh,
has
yeah.
almost the exact same story. She
Really?
had a fostering, expecting older children, ended up with a
Yeah.
call. We need a baby that needs a home for 5 days, and that is now her son, who's 16 years old. And
Wait.
I had a baby at the time, and like
Yeah.
came over, and I was like, "Here's diapers, here's a pack and play." For like 3 days, and then the 3 days just kept going and going and going. It's an unusual story, and I know two people it's happened to.
I cannot believe that.
Yeah.
Gosh, I would love to talk to. I've never talked to someone else who
Oh,
became a mom
I'll have
this
to
way.
connect you guys. Yeah, it's really
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
it's such a wild experience. And I
Yep.
actually, in the book, I read about how I got home and I Googled, how do you take care of a newborn? Because I didn't even know the daily activities. And then I just wrote down, okay, bottle, burp, nap, diaper, bottle, burp, nap, diaper.
You
And I
got it
just,
there. You got it.
yeah,
And then hopefully long sleep at some
yeah,
point.
sleep at some point. But it was, yeah, it was such a wild way. And then we adopted her when she was a year and a half. And then a year ago, so when she was 7, someone very, very dear to us was a surrogate and carried our second baby. So we now have a second baby who just turned 1, who I call F in the book. And he is absolutely darling and mushy and the complete opposite experience because we had all this time to plan. We went through the fertility aspect of surrogacy, and then we knew our surrogate was pregnant, obviously. And so I've experienced these two ways of becoming a mom.
You've experienced a lot of two ways of living, as it turns out.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you talk about, you are, I think, what we would call on the podcast, an Amy, like a planner and a person who's
Mm-hmm.
used to,
Mm-hmm.
likes a certain degree of control. And you
Mm-hmm.
talk about that first mom group that you went to with Kay and the
Mm-hmm.
people with expensive strollers and
Mm-hmm.
worrying about importing their formula from Germany because
Yeah.
that's where it has the better ingredients, whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about how being disabled kind of interrupted that for you and informed a different way of being as a parent. It's hard to
Right.
talk about. It's so beautifully explained in the book, and I don't want it to come off as facile as we're talking about it now, because it can be a little
Yeah.
bit like, well, disabled people, they've just got a depth of resources. It can come off a little facile as we're talking about it, but the way that you capture it in the book, I feel like is very deep.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, so I talk in the book about how the way I lived in my 20s, which I think was kind of an extreme version of control and perfectionism and ambition, and how if you imagine that person as a parent, the actual version of me as a parent is so far away from that. I am able to accept how little I actually control as a mom and
Mm.
how much I need other people, and how I don't know, I grieve this, but I believe it, that these lives are very fragile and our children, everything is precarious, and that that trying to ignore that or outrun it or like control so much that I forget it, it will only make my life less real and will only make me experience less of what it means to be a mom, in my opinion. And so, and I really credit becoming disabled, and also really more than that, disability culture, with my shift in perspective and shift in how I live my days. I no longer think I'm one step away from a good life. I just kind of think life is pretty hard. I think it's
Right.
hard for most people. I think most days are pretty kind of hard and bad sometimes. And the very best week we can hope for is just an annoying one. Like, I,
Love this. Love it.
yeah, we currently have a leak that we're getting repaired in our house. And it's annoying, and I got scammed out of all this money as part of
Mm.
it, and it's just a real thing. And that's kind of how life is, I think, on the very best days. Like, I think if the biggest thing I'm worrying about is a leak and some restoration scammer, then I am exceedingly lucky. And God, I don't mean that even like disability just gave me this ability to bright side or appreciate life for what it is. I think it's a little, even a little darker than that. It's just like life is hard. And when I was running away from that with everything in me, I was destroying myself and I wasn't actually experiencing anything. And if I accept that I control very little and that most days will be difficult, then I actually end up having like kind of precious good moments that I get to really live because I'm not waiting for them to be perfect.
So deep, so right on. I've talked about on the podcast a lot. I used to have a dream all the time that I was being chased by a monster. And then at some point, even as a young person, I realized if I turned around and looked at the monster, I would wake up. That like whatever it
Yeah.
was that was chasing me, I could get rid of by looking at it. And I try to think of that metaphor all the time as a person with pretty extreme anxiety that like
Mm-hmm.
you're more scared of the imaginary wolf at the door than opening it up and looking at what it really is. It's just such a good lesson for all moms who are struggling with that thing of like, but everyone else seems happy, but everyone else on Facebook looks so
Mm-hmm.
happy. And look at this one with her vegetable garden where she's just going out with her gauzy dress and picking
Yeah.
flowers. Like, why is my life full of garbage? It's because everyone's life is full of garbage. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, it is. And I think this like when I was watching the other moms in the group this isn't shade to them. I was just I mean my honest response at the time was like, "Oh, I am doing this all wrong," because they all had the same stroller and I had
Right.
this like terrible umbrella stroller that I've now realized I should not have been using for a newborn. And I was using like Infamil Gentle Ease, which is what we used with both kids, and they all had the German formula, those who weren't breastfeeding, and most of them were breastfeeding, and they all had the same baby wearing things, but I can't use those because they dislocate my ribs. And I just kind of felt, and I think we've all felt in groups, and maybe everyone in every group feels this way, like the odd duck. And at the time, I was like, I guess I'm doing this wrong. But I also was loving parenthood more than
Mm-hmm.
anyone else. I felt a real comfort in it and a real connection to it. And I think this like attempt to purchase our way into solidity as parents never satisfies the itch we're like trying to scratch. And so I think it just makes us very unhappy and costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a whole industry. This is not our fault. There's
No,
a
oh
whole
God, it's
industry
not our
being like,
fault.
you are one rocking babadoo away from a baby who sleeps through the night, and you're not.
Yeah, it's
But it's
capitalism.
not
Yeah.
just coming, it's capitalism all along. It's like, it's not
Yeah.
just coming from our own brains. I love this quote from the book talking about the night nurse who you had working with you. And this is another aspect of, I think, something that you were freeing yourself from just naturally. She
Yeah.
says, I took note of how you weren't abandoning yourself. I walked in and you were sitting on the floor making bottles because you couldn't stand at the counter. You never pretended that you didn't have needs. I have come to believe that accepting your own needs in the early days is a good predictor of how well you will adjust to parenthood. And this is a theme in this section of the book about being disabled, making it easier in some ways to access what you needed as a mom, and that
Mhm.
sometimes moms don't give themselves that opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's true. And it was a surprising chapter to write because the interviews turned out much different than I expected.
Mhm.
What I ended up finding is that disabled moms adjusted to parenthood easier than non disabled. And I think a lot of it is because disability does two things. One, it requires this daily physical problem solving that applies directly to the newborn days. Like so much of parenting in a newborn is physical and is physical unpredictability. It's just like kind of every sip they're taking, you're paying attention to. Every poop, every movement, every sleep, the way they grunt, their breaths are weird. Everything is just this like constant physical adjustment. And I think that's familiar. And then, but I
Mhm.
think also admitting that your body has needs in those early weeks is very difficult if you haven't had to experience a needy body before. And I think society cultivates a real fear of disability and a real fear of lifelong limitation or of always having need or always being in pain. And I think pregnancy and birth like take us into a relationship with that is terrifying if you
Yeah.
haven't lived there before. Because a lot of the people I interviewed, like women would say, well, I was home and I was in pain, or I couldn't stand up off the floor, or I could barely walk. And I worried I would always be this way. And that made me despair. And I think if we weren't so terrified of disability, we might have like just a little bit more distance in those early days from the physical recovery. And it might not be quite as destabilizing to have those early physical limitations after birth.
Yeah, I love this point, and it's something that we talk to a lot of people, and I'm also an oldie lock, so I've heard a lot of things, and this I was like, I'm hearing this for the first time, like this
Oh,
idea, and
thanks.
it really struck me of the fear of weakness, the
Mm-hmm.
kind of excitement we put around, like, you can't even tell she had a baby. Look at this celebrity. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
why are we making this invisible to ourselves and other people and like walking past any of the weakness that comes from giving birth to a giant human, you know? Why
Mm-hmm.
would we want to make that an experience that like it's completely invisible? That's the win.
Right, right. And why is independence in those early days or strength or look, she's just up and about? Like, why is that the
Doesn't need
thing
any help. Hooray. What?
yeah. Yeah, and there's this story, that someone told me about her, and she was non-disabled, and she had this extreme back pain and nerve pain after giving birth, and her baby had to visit the hospital every day or every other day, and it was a half-mile walk, and she talks about how that walk was agony, like, that she was just walking from their apartment to the hospital in so much pain, and it made her postpartum depression worse. She just thought, like, "I cannot live like this." And as she told the story, I thought, like, why did no one give you a wheelchair?
Right.
And I think there's this fear of needing adaptive equipment, of needing
Yes.
other people, of being fragile, that we would rather endure agony than admit that we need things. And I don't blame her for not getting a wheelchair. Someone should have said, don't make this new mom walk
Walk a half a mile.
every
There's
other
no
day. I mean,
prize at the end,
then
there's no gold star
you just get to sit in a chair with wheels and someone pushes you. That is better.
and not in pain. What a
Yes.
concept.
Yeah.
We love it.
Yeah.
So you say in the book, and this is about what we were just talking about, disabled people cannot rely on the dominant narrative of individualism and bootstrapism. Our bodies and minds dispel the myth of optimization. We could not survive with that worldview. And so together we create a new template. It's much more complicated and far less aspirational, but flexibility and compassion are exactly what you need when your body is sore from labor and your family dynamic has shifted beyond recognition. Disability culture offers a solution that is gentle and soft, and most importantly, true. Let's talk a little bit about that solution, which we were just getting to before the break. That is it that we need to be more gentle with ourselves? Is it just accepting the wheelchair for the walk? Like, where does that truth lie for all of us?
I think the actual solutions would probably be societal,
Structural.
but
Yeah,
I
for
think yeah,
sure.
structural always, but I think there also could be individual solutions, leading up to it, it's okay, this time will be harder than I can imagine in ways I cannot imagine. And admitting what's hard and asking for help and saying what I need is okay. That is not the worst case scenario. And needing more than I expect is not the worst case scenario. Particularly that time after becoming a parent, like I think we need to set our standards way, way lower
Right.
as far as like physical experience, emotional experience, organization, aesthetics. I think we should expect everything to be a disaster. I think,
Yes.
and then I think relying on other people. So when our second child was born, he had a very hard birth, and he and our surrogate were their lives were in danger for a period of time. And they were okay, thank goodness. And my emotional reaction to that was a lot more intense than I expected. I just had so much guilt and anxiety and flatness towards him in the couple days after that happened.
Mhm.
And I think my practice at admitting when I need things meant that I asked for a lot of help. Two of my best friends texted and said, "What do you need?" And I said, "Well, actually, a possum has died under the baby's bedroom and everything smells. And I know there's a solution to this, but I simply cannot imagine what it might be. And I think this possum is going to break me." And
This is the thing, right? This is the
yeah,
straw.
and my friend Jenna said, "Okay, don't think about it again." And then I got a text 30 minutes later from her, and she said, "The possum will be gone in an hour. It's paid for. He's not even going to come to the door. We love you. Tell us what else you need." And then I have another friend, Lauren, and they're a musician, and I was having trouble sleeping. And I started listening to white noise. I mean, obviously we had a newborn, so I was having trouble
Right.
sleeping, but I was having trouble sleeping besides that, like even between feedings. And I was trying white noise and it was giving me panic attacks. And so I said to my friend, I was like, "Can you help me find something that will soothe me at night and so I can get just like an hour of sleep?" And they went and called a producer friend, and they both sent over these clips of music that they thought would soothe my nervous system, and it worked. And I slept that
Mm.
night. And I don't know, it's just like I guess asking someone to take a dead possum and to send me some noise is random examples, but it's like I was just trying to tell the truth about how bad I was doing and not feel ashamed that I wasn't okay during that time.
And it's tied in the book, and I want to try to tie this for people listening that, and I'll start with this quote: disabled parents are experts at telling the truth about what we need and what we can handle. And from that place of honesty, we are skilled at finding answers. We research, we consider, we make no assumptions. We ask for help and advice and share what we've learned. And I think that kind of there's a series of stories about
Mhm.
parents with different disabilities and how they are parenting without sight, parenting by a woman, a doctor who only uses her mouth. And you
Mhm.
would say, an outsider might look at it and say, like, this is impossible. I remember as a child, there was some television show and it was a woman without arms, using her feet to do the kid's hair and put the diaper
Mhm.
on. And it was sort of like, you would just say, well, you couldn't parent without arms, but that being inside of the experience, it changes the story from this is not possible to how is this possible? And there
Mhm.
is something that we could all learn from starting at, because a lot of us are just handed a baby and think this is impossible. And so
Exactly.
it's coming, I
Yeah.
think that the disabled lens gives you this gift of every question is how is this possible, not this can't be
Mhm.
possible.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I love the way you're saying that because if you're not disabled, you're often then pressured into emulating these perfected versions of parenting generally sold to you by companies selling things. And then, but if you're disabled, the performed view of parenthood won't work for you. And so you kind
Right.
of start from scratch.
Right.
And there's real freedom in that. But I think everyone could start from scratch. Like, who am I? Who is my family? What are our needs? What's our financial situation? What is my body like? What are my emotions like? Do I sleep well? And I guess changing the standards based on our own individual experiences, I think offers a lot of freedom to all parents.
Yeah, I think we've often come to that on the podcast, that changing where you start the question is really
Hmm.
it unlocks so much. And
Hmm.
this book really lit me up with that. Like, oh, right. You're not going into it and saying, well, I guess I have to get this stroller because your body does not allow you to
What would I
use
do
the
with that
fancy
stroller? Yeah.
stroller. Right.
Yeah.
It's too heavy. It's too this, it's too that. And
Yeah.
so that perspective of solving problems from a very practical point of view, it seems
Mhm.
so simple, but we don't allow ourselves that luxury to say, okay, I've got
Mhm.
3 kids and I need to go to the store. I guess I'll have to suck it up, buttercup, because that's what I've been told by everyone. And maybe there's a whole other solution.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, the stroller thing, what I actually do to carry my baby is there's this belt that's sold to parents who work from home during the early days of COVID. It's so that they could put a baby on their lap, attach the baby to their lap, and then still work on the computer.
Huh.
So, like, very niche product. But I use it on my wheelchair, but it wasn't quite the right size. So some friends like took it apart and they sewed on an extension for me. And so I actually use a $30 Velcro thing, like adapted by some friends of mine, and that's how I carry my baby on my lap on the wheelchair. I think he loves it. It means he gets to sit on my lap out in the world, and
Yep.
it's a win for both of us, and it's a much less expensive, but it's a solution that's tailored to our specific needs.
There is so much in this book, and I want everybody to read it. We're going to link to it and all of that. But you come in the end to this quote that I'd like you to talk about, talking about kind of reckoning with your disability and this big change in your life that happened to you
Mhm.
following your hike that you talk about. The truth is, not only is my life in this disabled body still worth living, but it is also better. I mean that. I would pick this version of myself. I would pick this version of my days. The only way that I can explain this reality is that the standards by which I thought I should measure a life, by the diversity of experiences and absence of suffering and range of possibility, were the wrong metrics. So we've been talking a lot about that, the idea
Mhm.
that we're measuring things maybe by the wrong stick. But coming to this conclusion about your own life, talk a little bit about those metrics and how you kind of came to realize that they were the wrong measuring stick.
Yeah, I think I saw my life as in every part that fell short of perfection was like a personal affront to me, and I could not enjoy it until it was all the way good.
Right.
And I think that was such a desperate attempt to ignore the reality, which is this ends. It will never be perfect. We're all fragile. We all suffer. And it made it so I never really felt like I was in the world. I felt like I was just trying to control the entire world. And then being disabled, although it does include for me a lot of physical pain and suffering and limitation, I feel like I'm actually alive now.
Mm.
And I just really mean that. I feel like I exist in the world. I feel like I know my kids and they know me, and I know my friends and they know me, and I know my husband and he knows me. And that's kind of a miracle to get to live that way.
Mm. That is so well said. And I feel like it just captures the magic that is this book. It is called Unfit Parent: A Disabled Mother Challenges an Inaccessible World. We will link for you to purchase it from our bookshop, which is an independent bookseller. And Jessica, tell our audience where else they can find your work.
You can find me on my website, jessicaslice.com. I have a Substack, and then I'm on Instagram, Jessica Slice.
We will link to all those places as well. I loved this book. I could not recommend it more highly. Unfit Parent. And we will link to everywhere you can find Jessica. Jessica, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you.